This is the 3D VIEW-MASTER story Lassie. Writes the log Fume. Quite a sight, isn't it, Lassie? Forest Ranger Corey Stewart said to the big dolly squeezed beside him in the cabin of the Forest Service plane, as the little craft banged the vast panorama of Washington's Cascade Mountains spread beneath them, mile on mile of rugged, tree-clad grandeur. Rough, answered Lassie, and the pilot, Merle Dixon, agreed. Spectacular is the word, he said, but you can see why the usual logging methods aren't practical here. Those mountains are rough. Maybe this balloon logging scheme we're working on will be the answer, said Corey. I certainly hope so. I understand there are a lot of good men in this area who need the work. Besides, it will help us get valuable timber out without scaring those beautiful hills. Can you imagine what the old-time loggers would think of bringing out timber dangling from a balloon? Merle laughed. They'd probably swallow their chew of turbacy and turn in their eggs. Turning south, Merle flew down the Cascades ridges until they were broken by the mighty Columbia, where his guests stared in awe at the Indian-named Bridge of the Gods and at the mighty Bonneville Dam spanning the river's width. "Okay, tour's over," said Merle, turning west toward Portland. "It's a long drive back up to our cabin, and I know you two are eager to get started." VIEW-MASTER Reel 1. Picture 1. The next morning, Lassie and Corey were upright and early at their cabin. Corey to breakfast and prepare his day's work, Lassie to investigate the strange new woods all about them. "Ready to go, girl?" said Corey, as he emerged from the little home to find Lassie eagerly perched on a stump. "We've got a long drive up in the hills to reach the White River Logging Company. They're the ones who are going to try our balloon logging idea." "Oh yes," Merle said, "you might find a playmate up there too." Picture 2. As the road climbed and twisted up the foothills of the Cascades, Corey stopped periodically to check the thick stands of Douglas fir that crowded the trail. Lassie took the opportunities to check the forest scents: black-tailed deer, beaver, mink. A faint trace of cougar brought a growl from deep in her throat. Along the hillside, Corey noticed a weather-beaten wooden structure, much like a long, narrow bridge which slanted up the mountainside, disappearing further on into the trees. Picture 3. When the strange bridge appeared next to the road, Corey and Lassie stopped the truck to investigate. "Why, it's an old log flume," the ranger exclaimed. "Merle told me that there was one still operating here, the only one left in the States." Though he had never seen a flume in operation, Corey knew their history. In the early days of logging, crews in particularly rough areas would construct a through, sometimes miles in length, reaching from their work areas to the nearest river. They would then divert a high mountain stream into the upper end and dump their logs into the chute of rushing water. Other men would snag the logs when the flume dropped them into the river, form them into rafts, and float them off to a mill. This flume, Corey knew, ended at the White River Mill itself, on the banks of the Columbia. Picture 4. From this reminder of logging's colorful past, Corey and Lassie rounded another bend in the road to come upon a scene out of a fantastic future. Tugging at its mooring lines high above them, dwarfing the truck and heavy equipment beneath it, was a huge silver balloon. It was the heart of the system Corey hoped to introduce here, actually a modern replacement for the Fume they had just passed. Rather than scaring the mountains with a road to every logging site, an expensive and difficult project in this hilly country. Each crew would attach its fallen trees to a balloon, guided by a cable extending out from a central loading area. The balloon and its cargo would be drawn in by a winch, sailing effortlessly over hills and canyons. Picture 5. Corey and Lassie carefully inspected the site where the balloon and other equipment were being assembled and tested. He learned from the foreman that several test lifts had already been successfully made. The gas bag would be ready to go into operation as soon as Corey worked out details with the operators of White River. Back in the truck, Corey drove the few remaining miles to the secluded headquarters of the logging company. Although it was Saturday and the mill was not in operation, the foreman had promised to meet them. Picture 6. When Andy Burke, the grizzled old chief of the rough mill and Fume, came out to greet Corey, Lassie got to meet the playmate Corey had promised her. It was Dandelion, Andy's pet cat. The two men smiled as Lassie and Dandelion circled and sniffed each other warily. "It's all right, Lassie," Andy laughed. "He won't hurt you, but watch out for his tricks. I spent 2 hours yesterday hunting for my pipe before I found it out in the woods where Dandelion had hidden it. I live alone here on weekends, spend a lot of time teaching him stunts, but now he's getting too smart." Picture 7. When Corey and Andy disappeared into the office to discuss the balloon operation, Dandelion dutifully meowed on invitation to his guest to join him on a tour of his mill. Lassie followed her host around the grounds through the silent mill plant and stopped to stare at a huge loader, which could grasp a whole truckload of logs in its huge claws and carry them about, much like Lassie might do with a bone. Dandelion stopped politely so that Lassie could inspect each point of interest, but yawned often to let the dog know that this was old stuff to him. VIEW-MASTER Reel 2, Picture 8. The tour ended at the mill pond, where, on work days, agile pond monkeys sorted out the floating logs and guided them to a chain belt. Here they hooked on to begin the process of being debarked and sawn into rough lumber before shooting down the flume to the finishing mill at the Columbia. Already bored at the familiar sights and eager to impress his big guest, Dandelion leaped lightly to a plank, crossing the pond. Not to be outdone, Lassie too crossed the bridge, though she was uneasy on the waving board. Picture 9. "Humph," thought Dandelion, "so you can cross a plank. All right, let's see you follow me up here." And the big yellow cat scrambled up the steps to the narrow, slippery catwalk, which ran beside the log flume. With tail held high, he strode casually down the walk, then turned to see how Lassie was doing. But Lassie had taken one look at the treacherous path and decided that the game had gone far enough. As though bored with the whole affair, the collie sat down, ignoring Dandelion's mailed challenges, and then stretched out in the sun and pretended to sleep. Picture 10. Angered because Lassie would not rise to his bait, Dandelion pranced back and forth on the Fume walk, yowling loudly, but Lassie slept on. Finally, giving up on the dog in disgust, the cat decided to investigate Corey's truck. Maybe there would be some mischief to be done there that might bring some action. As the cat strolled away, Lassie opened one eye and carefully watched. When Dandelion climbed in the pickup, Lassie scrambled to her feet. The cat was now on her property. In a moment, Dandelion reappeared with Corey's keys dangling from his mouth. With an angry bark, Lassie raced across the mill yard, but Dandelion, delighted at the reaction he had gotten, slipped into the nearby woods. Picture 11. Using his smaller size to great advantage, Dandelion was a yellow streak through the tangled underbrush, but Lassie stayed on the trail, for she knew the cat had taken her master's property. Finally, Dandelion circled back to the mill and bounded lightly up a stack of rough lumber. Flying along in pursuit, Lassie scrambled up after him, but the big dog's added weight caused the stack to shift. Lassie's claws scratched frantically for a hold as the boards moved beneath her, but it was too late. With a crash, the stack collapsed. Lassie was thrown to the ground, and the heavy timber thudded across her back. There was a sharp yelp of pain, and then Lassie lay still and silent. Picture 12. In the mill office, the crash of lumber and the cry of pain brought a quick response from Corey Stewart. "That's Lassie!" he cried, leaping to the doorway. Andy Burke was only a step behind when Corey reached his friend's quiet form. Quickly lifting away the falling timbers, Corey tenderly examined Lassie. At her master's touch, Lassie regained consciousness, whimpered softly, and tried to rise. "Her back legs are paralyzed," exclaimed Corey. "We've got to get her to a veterinarian fast." Picture 13. Cradling Lassie in his arms, Corey hurried to his truck and placed her in the front seat, while Andy gave him directions on locating Dr. Sim's veterinary clinic in Columbia City, the mill town at the end of the Fume. Leaping into the driver's seat, Corey reached for the ignition. "Why, the keys are gone," he said in a puzzled tone. Frantically he searched his pockets. "I'm sure I left them in the truck." "Dandelion," Andy blurted. "I'll bet he took them." Lassie was probably chasing him when the lumber fell. "Heaven knows where they might be now, and my car is broken down." "Isn't there another truck?" Corey asked. "Even a log truck. Anything at all to get us down the mountain?" "Sorry, Corey, this place is deserted on Saturdays," Andy replied sadly. Picture 14. "But we've got to get her to the vets," Corey repeated frantically. Andy Burke hesitated. "There is one way," he said slowly, "but it's pretty dangerous. The Fume boat. It's a little boat we use to inspect the Fume. It'll get you down the mountain in a hurry, but—" Corey cut him short. "Let's go," he said, scooping up Lassie and heading towards the top of the log flume. Snatching up a blanket from his cabin, Andy led the way to the log loading platform, where he placed the little craft in the rushing flume and held it steady while Corey loaded the boat's precious cargo. Corey wrapped Lassie carefully in the blanket, then seated himself in the boat's stern, cradling the dog's head in his lap. "Let her go," he cried to Andy. VIEW-MASTER Reel 3, Picture 15. The current jerked the tiny craft away from the loading platform, and Corey and Lassie's fantastic voyage was underway. Without a paddle or any means of controlling the boat's flight, they knew they must ride their craft to whatever end fate held for them. Faster and faster the little boat flew, bouncing from one weathered fume wall to the other. Lassie whimpered her pain and fear. Corey's hand caressed her hand and told her that all would soon be well. But as the trees began to blur with the flume boat's increasing speed, Corey began to wonder if he actually felt as confident as he pretended to be. Picture 16. hurtling along the dark forest floor, then soaring suddenly into open air as the flume spanned a gorge. Corey and Lassie could only hang on and hope. The old flume creaked and groaned beneath the boat's passage, and the elevated section swayed sickeningly as they passed over. Water sprayed over the blunt bow, drenching them. Corey leaned forward over the quiet form in his lap, shielding Lassie with his own body. Then, as they shot down a long straight section, Corey looked up and gasped. Just ahead was a footbath bridge crossing the flume. It was so low it appeared that the shallow boat itself could hardly pass beneath, let alone its passengers. "Get down, Lassie, and stay down!" Corey screamed above the rush of wind. Picture 17. Holding Lassie's head down with one hand, Corey stretched back until his body lay almost horizontally across the boat's stern. With bare inches to spare, they shot under the obstruction and rocketed on. Letting out his pent-up breath, Corey pulled himself erect and twisted to look back at the bridge, already tiny in the distance. "I'll never know how we made it." Then Corey tenderly patted Lassie's head. "Hold on, girl, just hold on a little while longer," he murmured. "It can't be too much farther," he added hopefully, more to himself than to his beloved collie. Picture 18. Peering over the bow of the boat, down the flume's course, Corey suddenly noticed that the forest seemed to end just ahead, and the flume curved off to empty space. As the boat left the woods and entered the curve, Corey and Lassie found themselves flying high over the Columbia Gorge. Corey scarcely glanced at the spectacular view, though, for it was all he could do to hold his seat as the turbulent water sent the flume boat bouncing and skittering through the banked curve. Spray all but blinded him as he clutched the boat's side with one hand and clung to Lassie with the other. He felt the angle of the chute steepen, but then the flume boat began to slow its headlong rush. Corey cautiously raised his head. They had nearly reached the mill. Picture 19. As the blunt flume boat hit the slack water, Corey slumped forward in his seat for a moment, breathing a silent prayer of thanks. Then he paddled with his hands to guide them to the flume's edge. Eager hands caught the boat at the mill's loading platform. One of the men said quickly, "I'm Dr. Sims. Andy Burke phoned me to be watching for you. Said to tell you Dandelion had brought your keys back too. He'll be down shortly. Now let's get that dog to my office." Shaky from their long ride, Corey and Lassie were bundled into the doctor's waiting car and rushed to the veterinarian's clinic. Tender hands carried Lassie to the examination table, and Dr. Sims quickly pulled the X-ray apparatus into position before showing Corey into the waiting room. As Corey anxiously paced while the doctor worked over Lassie's crippled form, Andy and Dandelion, a very subdued cat, drove up in the Forest Service truck. Picture 20. "Corey, you made it!" Andy exclaimed as he rushed through the door. Dandelion at his heels. "How is Lassie?" "Don't know yet," Corey replied. "The doctor's with her." "Corey, I'm awful sorry about all this," Andy said. "I know it was Dandelion who caused it. I found him after you left, hiding under the bed and shaking like a leaf. When I told him to get the keys, he went out and came right back with them." "Forget it, Andy," Corey answered. "It certainly wasn't your fault. And that mournful look on Dandelion's face sure tells me that he's sorry." Just then the door to the inner office opened and Dr. Sims said, "You can come in now." Before the man could move, Dandelion streaked to the examination table to visit the patient. Picture 21. "Good news, Mr. Stewart," said the doctor. "As I thought it was a ruptured disc, I gave her an injection of cortisone and dextrose solution to pull the water from the tissue and relax the pressure. She's groggy now, but she'll be almost as good as new in a few hours. That's the best news I've heard in a long time, doctor," Andy broke in. "I still feel responsible." I said, "Forget it, Andy," Corey replied. "Besides, I think Dandelion is doing a pretty good job of apologizing for both of you." The three men smiled as Dandelion licked the collie's muzzle gently and purred her concern. Lassie nuzzled the yellow cat to let him know that all was forgiven. Then she struggled up to reward Corey for his care. "That makes the whole ride down the mountain worthwhile," Corey laughed. "But let's not do it again."